Earlier this year, I went to Guangzhou for the first time. I have no idea what the official English pronunciation for it is, by the way, because Chinese cities just use their Chinese pinyin for their English name. For those who are not familiar with pinyin, it's basically a Latin alphabet-based phonetic system that is used to standardize the pronunciation in Mandarin Chinese, which is why Xi'an is spelled XI instead of SHI. So when do you pronounce a city name as the locals, and when do you pronounce it as it's spelled? Why is it Paris and not Paris, but it's Edinburgh and not Edinburgh? It doesn't. There's no consistency. Basically, my point is. But luckily, I do speak Cantonese, which is the language spoken in Guangzhou. So I'll just call Guangzhou Guangzhou. These are just a bunch of random videos I took when I was there, by the way. So there's just something for you to look at as you listen to me ramble. By the way, Guangzhou is also known as Goat Town or Ram Town. Somehow, I've never been to Guangzhou, although it's pretty close to Hong Kong, which is where I lived. It used to take like 3 hours to get there, which is probably why I never visited. Now it takes 50 minutes, which is good. It was, of course, a work trip. There isn't a lot of reasons for anyone to go to Guangzhou. My dad was born there, but he left when he was pretty young. Anyway, my point is, Guangzhou isn't much of a tourist destination. It is, however, a city of 18 million people, or 27 or 32, depending on where you draw the city border. It is the Guang in Guangdong. For your English speakers, it's the Can in Cantonese, which makes it sound like it could be a good city motto. You know, we put the Can in Cantonese. How did the English get Canton from Guangdong? It's actually pretty interesting. It's actually a French word, as in canton, which means corner or area, which of course also means like a province. If you've ever been to Switzerland, for instance, you might have heard of this. So it's a case of coincidental phonetic overlapping of the word Guangdong in Cantonese and Canton in French. Anyway, Guang means open area, and Guangdong and Guangsai, or in Mandarin, Guangdong and Guangxi, together are considered as the plains south of the 5 main mountain ranges of eastern China, aka where most people lived in China's history. And Guangzhou is the main commerce and cultural and political center of this entire area throughout China's history. So throughout the last couple thousand years, basically, until Hong Kong entered the game. A side note about Hong Kong, since we're talking about Cantonese culture, it is insane how dominant Hong Kong was, and in some way still is, as a cultural hegemon of not only Cantonese culture, but Chinese culture as a whole. If you ask someone to name a Chinese movie, chances are they would name a movie from Hong Kong. So because we Hong Kongers are sort of at the center of this hegemony, we tend to think that any other forms of Cantonese is an imperfect imitation of our version of it. That's how hegemony works for those who lived inside the core. So Hong Kongers tend to think that the Cantonese spoken by our neighbors to the north, aka mainland Cantonese, are somehow polluted by Mandarin, while without a shred of irony ignoring the much more obvious fact that our Cantonese has been completely bastardized by English influences. But linguistically, this divergence or this difference in language fusion is interesting to me. And I'm not a professional linguist, but I reckon because of the difference between English and Cantonese is so big, their influence mostly manifests in the form of loan words, such as we call cherries 菜蕾鸡 instead of 樱桃, and we call strawberries 西多贝蕾 instead of 草莓, right? And sometimes the English words will replace actual Chinese words outright, like someone in Hong Kong might say, I'll check half on report, which means I'll check the report. While in Guangzhou, I reckon has more influence from Mandarin, which is more linguistically adjacent, or phonetically adjacent, and grammatically adjacent. So Mandarin can, in effect, infect their pronunciation in a more intrusive way, so to speak. This kind of linguistic evolution is of course very common, and it happens at the population level as well as the individual level. For example, my wife, who is from rural Alabama, no longer has her southern accent after moving to a mid-sized city in Tennessee. Now, this is because of a lot of things, but the most relevant here is about the representation in media, because for a character on American television, unless being Southern is an integral part of that character, similar to being black or being French or whatever, that character is not going to have a Southern accent. So what's my point? My point here, I think, is because of how dominant Hong Kong movies are. The kind of Cantonese you would hear in those movies, are Hong Kong Cantonese, is probably considered by many as the standard Cantonese. So there's this shared belief that compared to Hong Kong Cantonese, the Cantonese spoken by the people of Guangzhou, which has been this cultural center of Cantonese culture, is somehow corrupted and influenced by Mandarin. This belief is perhaps somewhat justified as an exaggerated version of the truth. So is this a big deal? I mean, at least it's interesting to me. It's the kind of thing that half the people could not care less about, and the other half will call it like a cultural genocide, which of course is stupid. Let's talk about something else. Traffic jams in China. It's pretty bad. It's bad even by American standards. I mean, China has much, much better public transport infrastructure than the US, but still, there are too many cars. And I do, again, unironically blame the US for this, because the idea that owning a car equals a better quality of life is an idea that is invented and amplified and exported all around the world by the US. And so a lot of Chinese people with their newfound wealth also bought cars. And because of the higher density in Chinese cities, it only takes a small percentage of people to start driving before the traffic becomes unamenable. The traffic in Guangzhou was so bad that it was actually faster for me to take the subway than taking the cab on most trips, even if I had to walk for like half a mile after I got off the train. But it's a problem because there are lots of places that I couldn't get to using the subway because of how spread out a lot of the newer developments are, because a lot of them are car-centric developments, and so we're caught in a negative feedback loop. I feel like all the focus on building subways, China has somehow forgotten about bus lanes and bike lanes. So buses having to share the road with private cars are always going to be slower than driving, and biking having to share the road with other cars will always be more dangerous than driving. And so people will always drive if they can afford to. And so we're caught in another feedback loop. Since I've moved back to Hong Kong, I've visited all the big three Chinese cities, which are Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou. And they all have the same problem with traffic and these new car-centric developments. Geographically, all three of them are relatively flat, so there isn't enough of a natural constraint to help with planning, like that's the case, like the case for Hong Kong. So it's not obvious where the main arteries or subway lines should go, so to speak. So coming from Hong Kong, where I can get to pretty much anywhere within the main city in about 30 minutes by taking a subway or a car. I was irritated when I was late to a meeting in Guangzhou because it took me over an hour to go about 10 miles during rush hour in a cab to a place where I couldn't get to using the subway. But what can be done? China is already pretty aggressive in terms of limiting car ownership inside cities. But at the same time, it's also pushing hard on, electric vehicle production, which is, it creates a dilemma for the country. But hey, as long as they're still also building out the subway system, that's at least we'll have that, it's a bit sweaty during rush hours, but I'll still rather do that over driving, because I don't know why people don't talk about this, but driving is work. Driving is like being your own cab driver. I'd rather staying on a train, but maybe that's just me. For now, my name is Yu Yun, and thank you for watching.